Welcome back to Bible Talks on WBCM Radio for another deep dive into the scriptures. Yeah, we're continuing with Genesis.
Today we're at Genesis 17.
Yeah, this chapter, takes us right to the heart of, I think, like a really pivotal moment in Abraham's life.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a man who is 99 years old.
Yeah.
About to enter into a covenant that will, honestly, reshape his destiny, his family's future, and honestly, the course of history.
Right. Big stuff.
You don't get many deals like that at 99.
No, you don't. You don't. And, it's important to point out, I think, in biblical times, a covenant was much more than just like a simple agreement. It was like a solemn binding promise, often accompanied by, symbolic rituals and lasting consequences. This was serious business.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So when God appears to Abram and establishes this covenant, it's not just about land or possessions. This is about something far grander.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about God promising Abram descendants as countless as the stars, a lineage from which kings will arise. It's almost inconceivable, especially given Abram and Sarai's age at this point.
Right.
And this is really where the lineage of Jesus starts.
Yeah.
This is a promise that sets in motion God's plan of salvation for humanity. So quite literally, this covenant sets the stage for the entire story of Christianity as we know it.
That's mind-blowing when you think about it that way. Talk about long-term planning.
Right.
But even with this incredible promise, the text tells us that Abram laughs when he hears that he'll have a son with Sarah at their age. I can kind of understand why. From a human perspective, it seems pretty impossible.
Yeah.
What do you make of Abram's reaction?
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Here's Abram, considered the father of faith, and even he has moments of doubt. And I think that this highlights a really important truth. Doubt and faith are not mutually exclusive. Even the most devout individuals wrestle with uncertainty. And in fact, I think Abram's laughter actually adds a very human dimension to this encounter with the divine. It reminds us that it's okay to question, it's okay to struggle, it's even okay to laugh in the face of, the seemingly impossible.
Yeah, I like that perspective.
Yeah.
It makes me think about all the times I've questioned God's promises in my own life.
Sure.
But God doesn't rebuke Abram for his laughter. Instead, he reaffirms his promise, and he changes Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of a multitude.
That's right.
And Sarai's to Sarah, meaning princess.
Yeah.
What's the significance behind these name changes?
Yeah, the name changes are incredibly powerful. They signify a new identity, a new destiny. God isn't just making a promise, he's reshaping their very being to align with that promise.
Wow.
It's like he's saying, from this moment forward, you will be known by who I have called you to be. And this act really, I think, reminds us that God doesn't simply work with who we are. He transforms us into who he intends us to become.
That's a beautiful way to put it. But I've always been curious about the sign of the covenant. Circumcision.
Okay.
It seems like such a specific and honestly drastic ritual. Why do you think God chose this as the outward symbol of his covenant with Abraham?
Yeah, that's a question that has, fascinated theologians for centuries. Circumcision, was practiced in various ancient cultures. But within the Abrahamic covenant, it takes on a very profound meaning. It signifies a physical and spiritual separation, like a setting apart of Abraham and his descendants as God's chosen people. It's a visible mark of belonging, a reminder of the unique bond between God and his people.
So it's not just about a physical act. It's about a deep inward commitment to God and his covenant.
Precisely. It's a tangible representation of an intangible reality. And, this concept of being set apart continues to resonate with, Christians today. We're called to be in the world, but not of it, right?
Right.
We're called to live by a different set of values, a different standard of conduct. And, circumcision in its ancient context serves as a powerful visual metaphor for this spiritual truth.
It makes you think about the sacrifices we're willing to make to follow God, the ways in which we choose to set ourselves apart from the world around us. But before we go too far down that road, what about Ishmael? Abraham already has a son, and he expresses concern for him. How does God address this?
Yeah, well, this is where we see the compassion and I think the complexity of Abraham's character, right? He's concerned for Ishmael's future, and God reassures him, promising blessings for Ishmael as well.
Okay.
However, God makes it clear that the covenant will specifically pass through Isaac, the son yet to be born.
Right.
So it's a reminder that God's love and provision extend to all, even those outside the direct line of the covenant.
That's an encouraging reminder. So how does Abraham respond to all of this? It's a lot to take in, right? A name change, a seemingly impossible promise of a son, a new covenant with a rather intense sign.
Yeah. You know, Abraham's response is remarkable. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't question. He doesn't, try to bargain. He immediately gathers all the males in his household
Yeah.
and performs the circumcision, demonstrating his unwavering obedience and faith in God's promises. It's a really powerful illustration of putting action behind belief.
What stands out to you most about Abraham's actions here?
You know, it's his immediate obedience, even in the face of something so personal and, let's be honest, uncomfortable. It challenges us, I think, to consider how we respond to God's call in our own lives. Do we hesitate? Do we question? Do we rationalize? Or do we, like Abraham, step forward in faith, trusting that God will be faithful to his promises even when they seem impossible?
That's a powerful question to ponder. And speaking of pondering, listeners, we'd love to hear from you. What strikes you most about this interaction between God and Abraham? What lessons can we draw from his example of faith?
Yeah, it's inspiring to see that kind of radical obedience. Especially, I think, when you consider the cultural context, the...
Circumcision wasn't just like a minor procedure back then.
Yeah,
I mean, it carried significant, social and religious weight.
absolutely. Yeah, it really signified this deep commitment, this willingness to set oneself apart for a greater purpose. And you're right to point out that cultural context. I mean, in Abraham's time, this act would have been seen as a radical demonstration of faith and loyalty to God.
Right. And it's not like God was asking him to do something easy or comfortable.
Right.
This was like a painful ritual,
Yeah,
the one that would have required, a lot of trust in the unseen.
exactly. Yeah, this wasn't about blindly following orders or anything. It was about choosing to trust God's plan even when it didn't make sense from a human perspective.
Right.
It reminds us that faith often requires us to step outside of our comfort zones, to embrace the unknown, and to trust that God will guide us through.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, what are the circumcisions of our own lives? What are the things that God is asking us to do that require us to step out in faith, to surrender our own comfort and control?
That's a profound question. Perhaps it's letting go of a harmful habit, or forgiving someone who has wronged us, or taking a leap of faith in our careers or relationships. It might be different for each of us, but I think the underlying principle is the same. Are we willing to trust God enough to obey, even when it's difficult, even when we don't fully understand?
Yeah. And that brings us back to, I think, the heart of this covenant. It's not just like a legal contract. It's a relationship built on trust and obedience.
Right.
And Abraham's willingness to undergo circumcision demonstrates his commitment to that relationship.
Yeah, it's a physical manifestation of this inward transformation.
Right.
And that transformation is really, I think, key to understanding the significance of this covenant. God isn't just choosing Abraham, he's shaping him, he's molding him into the man he needs him to be to fulfill his purpose.
So it's not just about what Abraham gets out of the covenant, it's about who he becomes in the process.
Precisely. And that's, I think, a crucial takeaway for us as well. Our relationship with God isn't just about receiving blessings.
Right.
It's about becoming more like Christ.
Yeah.
About allowing him to transform us from the inside out.
That whole concept of transformation is fascinating to me. It suggests that faith isn't like a static state. It's a journey, a process of continual growth and change.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a journey that requires both trust and action. We need to trust in God's promises, and we need to act on that trust even when it's challenging. And, Abraham's example in Genesis 17 provides, I think, such a powerful model for this dynamic interplay of faith and obedience.
Right, right. It makes you wonder, what would it look like for us to embrace that same level of radical obedience in our own lives? What, impossible promises is God calling us to trust in?
Those are questions worth pondering. And I think as we reflect on Abraham's story, it's important to remember that he wasn't a perfect man.
Right.
He had his doubts, he had his fears, his moments of questioning. But ultimately, he chose to trust God and to follow his leading.
That's encouraging, isn't it? Even the father of faith had his struggles. It reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be faithful. God can work with our imperfections, our doubts, our questions. He simply asks us to take that first step of faith and to trust him to lead the way.
Yeah, and I think that's such a beautiful message for all of us. No matter where we are on our faith journey, no matter how many times we've stumbled or questioned, God is always there ready to meet us with grace and guide us forward.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive into Genesis 17, what key insights would you say we've uncovered so far?
Well, I think we've seen the power of God's covenants, the significance of transformation, and the importance of radical obedience, even in the face of the unknown. We've also, I think, been reminded that faith is a journey, not a destination, and that God can work with our imperfections.
It's been a rich and thought-provoking discussion, and I'm excited to continue exploring these themes in, the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonates with you most from our conversation today? What questions or insights do you have about Abraham's covenant with God?
Yeah, it's amazing how much depth there is to unpack in just one chapter of Genesis.
Right.
Makes you realize how much we can miss if we just kind of skim the surface.
It really is. It's like peeling back layers of meaning,
Mhm.
you know, uncovering these deeper truths with each reading. And that's I think what makes studying the Bible so rewarding. There's always something new to discover, something to kind of challenge our assumptions and deepen our understanding.
Yeah, and it's not just about acquiring knowledge,
Mhm.
it's about allowing those truths to transform us, to shape our worldview, to guide our actions.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's about moving from head knowledge to, heart transformation.
Right. And I think Genesis 17 offers a really compelling, blueprint for that process. We see Abraham wrestling with doubt. He's, embracing this challenging command, and ultimately he chooses to trust God's promises, even when they seem impossible. And it's a powerful reminder, I think, that faith isn't passive. It's this active engagement with God's will, this willingness to step out in obedience, even when we don't fully understand.
Yeah, I love that image of faith as an active engagement.
Yeah,
It's not just about believing certain things, it's about living them out,
yeah.
embodying them in our daily lives.
Right. And that's where the real challenge lies, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to talk about faith, but it's much harder to actually put it into practice, especially when faced with adversity or uncertainty or honestly, even just the mundane challenges of everyday life.
Right. Yeah, it makes me think about how we often compartmentalize our faith.
Yeah.
We keep it separate for the rest of our lives.
Sure.
But Genesis 17 suggests that true faith permeates every aspect of our being, influencing our relationships, our work, our decisions, everything.
It's this holistic transformation. Right.
That begins in the heart and it radiates outward, impacting every area of our lives. And, it's a process, it's a journey, unfolds over time. It's not about reaching a state of, perfect faith. It's about continually striving to align our lives with God's will, trusting in His guidance, and allowing Him to shape us into the people He created us to be.
Radio WBCM. Radio WBCM.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis 17 today, what's the one takeaway you hope our listeners will carry with them?
Well, I hope they'll be encouraged by Abraham's example, reminded that even the father of faith had moments of doubt and uncertainty. And I hope they'll be challenged to consider, what radical obedience might look like in their own lives. What is God calling them to step out in faith and do, even if it seems impossible? Because when we align our lives with God's will, even the impossible becomes possible.
Well said. And listeners, remember, this was Bible Talks on WBCM Radio, part 17 in our series dedicated to exploring the Bible. We'd love for you to continue this conversation with us. Share your thoughts, questions, and insights in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future episodes.
And you can find us on YouTube at www.youtube.com/RadioWBCM. We're also on various podcast platforms, so you can listen to Bible Talks wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us today, and may God bless you as you continue to explore the richness and depth of His Word.